Welcome to A Line Through Time, where I take the time to look through your favourite franchises and work out how it all lines up. Now that I've run out of ideas for these side episodes, I'm going to be transitioning over from concept exploration to timeline expansion. This will include expanding on personal timelines of characters and groups, covering supplemental timelines, going further in depth on certain stories, and of course revisiting timelines I've already covered to fix mistakes and include newer titles like Sonic Pocket Adventure. I know, okay, I'm going to do it, leave me alone! And we're going to kick off this new part of the series with today's subject. Hyrule Warriors is a Legend of Zelda spin-off in the style of Koei Tecmo's Warriors franchise. Being made by another team, Nintendo has naturally designated the game as non-canonical to the core Zelda franchise, but what if they didn't? What if Hyrule Warriors was part of the core Zelda canon? Where would it fit in the official Zelda timeline? That's what I aim to explain here today, so let's begin. If you've not seen my explanation of the core canon and placement of Breath of the Wild, do so now because I'm going to be proceeding on the assumption that you've seen that video. Kinda like how Nintendo has no fucks to give about spoilers when they include characters and stories from Zelda in other games. But yeah, we'll be approaching this from the same angle. Even if it might fit better in a new branch, we're going to try and fit it into one of the three existing branches. The story features Cia, the Guardian of Time, who falls in love with Link and becomes corrupted by Ganondorf into attacking Hyrule with an army of monsters. Part of her plan involves opening rifts in time that lead to the errors of three previous games: Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess, and Skyward Sword. As you know from the previous episode, which you did watch because you're a good boy or girl or sword person, the Zelda timeline splits into three branches from the final battle of Ocarina. Skyward Sword is the genesis of the timeline, leaving only Twilight Princess occurring after the branching point. It takes place in the child timeline after Link went back in time to prevent Ganondorf's rise to power, as does Majora's Mask, from which the moon appears as a weapon utilised by Lana and Midna during the story. Now I could just leave it at that and say Hyrule Warriors takes place in the child timeline after Twilight Princess, but I'm sure some of you would ask, what about the DLC characters and the Wind Waker portions of Hyrule Warriors Legends? For the DLC we can't use that as evidence because there's no story context for their appearances, especially the girl who exists only in a dream world. As for the Wind Waker chapter, I'll get into that later. Let's just stick to evidence from the original Wii U release first. First of all, in the narration that explains who Cia is, it's mentioned that she lives in the woods, not in some nebulous void outside of time. This tells us that she exists within the timeline, which is relevant as you'll soon see. So after Cia opens up the rifts, the four heroes, Link, Impa, Sheik and Lana, split up and travel to the three eras. Lana, who we later learn is the good half of Cia that split off when she was corrupted, travels to the era of Twilight. Upon arrival, the very first thing she says is, pay attention to the wording there. What Hyrule looked like when Twilight invaded. Not what it looks like, not what it would look like, not when Twilight invades, or if Twilight invades. Lana isn't speaking hypothetically here, she's speaking in definitive past tense, indicating that these events did take place in the past. But, you may ask, as a former part of Cia, wouldn't Lana already know what this era looked like, even if it was from another branch? Again, Cia exists within the timeline, and her abilities and methods are unclear. It's mentioned in this stage's narration that Lana has never seen the Twilight Realm. Cia, meanwhile, displays enough knowledge of what things look like to have 100% accurate statues of Skyward Sword, Ocarina Child, and Twilight Wolf Link positioned throughout the Temple of Souls. This suggests that Lana doesn't have access to all the knowledge Cia had when they were one, and is thus only aware of what everyone else knows in regards to Hyrule's history. Meanwhile, Cia herself, the all-knowing Guardian of Time, only ever displays knowledge of the child timeline, never any others. Still not good enough for you? Let's try this. Impa and Sheik travel to the era of the Hero of Time. Impa makes her distrust of Sheik known, as the latter claims to be from Impa's tribe, but Impa knows it's a lie. So the question is, why doesn't Impa know Zelda is Sheik? If this game occurs after Ocarina, why doesn't Impa, the inheritor of the name of the princess's protector, know about this little scheme her predecessor cooked up back in the day? Especially when she can recognise this era from sight. You'd think it would be passed down as either a famous tale from Hyrule's past, or at least secretly from Impa to Impa, right? The only explanation I can think of as to why that isn't the case is that it never happened. When placing Breath of the Wild last time, I said that Ruto's Ocarina history being referenced removed the child timeline from the equation because Link preventing Ganondorf Ganondorf's rise to power would mean he never needed to awaken the sages. Similarly, the fact that Impa and Zelda never had to flee from Ganondorf means the Sheik scheme was never enacted. This then explains why Impa doesn't know, and possibly explains why the plan works here at all, since Cia would surely see right through the disguise if it had been used before, and have her forces target Sheik specifically. It also further supports the idea that Cia isn't capable of seeing into the other timelines, or she'd see through the disguise regardless of the branch she's in. And speaking of Ocarina, the status quo of the Ocarina era seems fairly peaceful, and no one mentions Ganondorf's reign of terror from the Downfall timeline, nor do they mention their good friend Link, or indicate that Darunia and Ruto knew each other beforehand, as in the Adult and Downfall timelines. Hey man, what about Navi? A very specific, very uneducated portion of you ask. She says someone named Zelda, indicating that she doesn't know who Zelda is, supporting the child timeline. Well, this would be a very good piece of evidence if not for the fact that the fairy is only referred to as Navi in the North American release. Everywhere else it's just a random fairy, so this sadly doesn't count. And that's everything from the original release. Taking Hyrule Warriors on its own, the evidence all points towards the child branch sometime after Twilight Princess. But does that change when we delve into the additions from Hyrule Warriors Legends on the 3DS? In Legends, there are two new storylines introduced, the side story of trash tier waifu Linkle, and the relevant continuation where a rift to the Wind Waker era opens and Link and Lana team up with Tetra and King Daphnis. First, I'd like to draw your attention to the way this era is referred to at various points in the game's narration. It repeatedly refers to that era as Tetra's world, not time. Likewise, it uses the word dimensional, not temporal. While this could simply be to justify the drastically different proportions of the children, or because having Daphnis active in human form alongside Tetra doesn't really mesh well with Wind Waker itself, it seems more likely to me that they're suggesting that the adult timeline is separate from the one Hyrule Warriors takes place in. Additionally, Lana doesn't recognise Tetra, an incarnation of Zelda, even though she can recognise the Twilight Realm without having previously seen it. The narration also refers to King Daphnis as a legend, but he's only relevant to the adult timeline. None of the characters are shown to recognise him, even Tetra, so this detail doesn't really affect much, but it's worth mentioning for the sake of being thorough. But you once again interrupt me to ask, how do we know Cia isn't capable of reaching into timeline branches other than the one she exists in, even if she can't see into them? I mean, maybe her magic is capable of doing that, she just doesn't do it because she doesn't know about the other timelines. Well, again, we have no proof either way on account of the exact scope of her abilities being somewhat unclear. The rifts to this other world are opened by Phantom Ganon, not by Cia. In spite of his design, Phantom Ganon in this context seems, rather than the same Phantom Ganon from the Wind Waker, to be the spirit of the now dead Ganondorf from Hyrule Warriors. The narration says in the world, not from, and his first on-screen appearance takes place in the Warriors world before he gained his power boost. We know he stole Cia's dark magic in the Triforce of Power, but we don't know for sure whether he can open the dimensional rift because Cia can, or if her magic is simply used as energy to power his own unrelated spell. All of this evidence seems to suggest that the Wind Waker era is not from the same timeline as the rest of the game, thus setting Hyrule Warriors in either the Child or Downfall timelines, with all prior evidence pointing towards the Child branch. Well, there is one piece of evidence that makes things a little unclear. I said before that Linkle's side story was irrelevant, and to the overall story of Hyrule Warriors it is, but her first chapter has her enter Faron Woods and come face to face with the Skull Kid from Majora's Mask, wearing Majora's Mask. In case you missed it, this is a complication because Majora's Mask takes place in the Child timeline, and Link releases the Skull Kid from Majora's Hold at the end of that game. And we know this is the same Skull Kid because Tattle and Tail, his two fairies, are with him. Now, we know he didn't come through one of the rifts because this stage is supposed to take place roughly around the same time that Link and crew are meeting up with Lana before Cia opens up the rift in the next chapter. So either he's from the present and got repossessed like an idiot, or he was simply never freed from Majora's Hold because he never encountered the Hero of Time, or perhaps defeated the Hero of Time. Really, there's no evidence for any of these possibilities because he just shows up with no explanation and is never heard from again beyond that one stage. If he didn't have Majora's Mask on, we could just say he's being a bit of a dick because, well, he's a Skull Kid. But he does have it on, and I don't think the devs put any thought into it. So what's the most likely in-universe explanation if we were to select one? Tattle and Tail don't mention this as being the second time it's happened, nor in fact do they speak at all, which is a bit unusual, but that seems to leave him being the Skull Kid from another timeline separate from Majora's Mask. The best explanation I can think of is that Hyrule Warriors takes place in a fourth timeline whose origin is similar to that of the Downfall branch, where Ocarina Link dies during Majora's Mask. Thus, the Skull Kid remained possessed but not a real threat to Hyrule, thereby allowing the events that occur after Majora's Mask to play out mostly the same as in the Child branch, since that Link is believed to have never returned anyway. But if we're going to keep trying to place Hyrule into the existing branches, we have to either ignore Skull Kid or say he got repossessed by the mask and used magic to keep Tattle and Tail silent and obedient to explain their presence and lack of attempts to rebel. Or, maybe it's another Skull Kid who just happens to get possessed by Majora's Mask and have two fairy companions with the same colours as Tattle and Tail. Not very likely. It's not ideal, but those are really the only ways you can make this work aside from saying that Linkle's entire story is non-canonical, and I'd be okay with that, But, even with that baffling lack of thought, the evidence we have so far indicates that 1. The Wind Waker, and by extension the entire adult branch, is separate from the one Hyrule Warriors takes place in. 2. Twilight Princess is part of the same branch as Hyrule, suggesting either the Child branch or an offshoot of said branch. 3. Hyrule Warriors takes place after Twilight Princess, probably after Four Swords Adventures 2 for the sake of future roster expansions. So even with that odd contradiction, the vast majority of the evidence supports the idea that Hyrule Warriors and Hyrule Warriors Legends take place at the end of the Child branch. And just for fun, let's briefly discuss Hyrule Warriors' internal timeline as well. The core story consists of two campaigns that lead into one another, the campaign against Sia and the rise and fall of Ganondorf. The original Wii U release then had a DLC campaign focused on Sia's actions, starting a little before the first campaign and ending just before its final battle. Hyrule Warriors Legends then added two more, Linkle's story set alongside the two main campaigns and the Wind Waker story set after everything else. Linkle doesn't actually get involved in the Wind Waker portion, which only drives home how pointless an inclusion she really was. But anyway, without further ado, the Hyrule Warriors timeline, yes, I'm still doing this in the side episodes, goes a little something like this. Child timeline. The hero of time returns to the past to warn the royal family of Ganondorf's schemes. Once Ganondorf is imprisoned, Link leaves Hyrule in search of his missing fairy companion, Navi. He's attacked by a Skull Kid possessed by Majora's Mask and finds himself in the land of Termina. Link releases the Skull Kid from Majora's hold and saves Termina from destruction. He continues to search for Navi and is never heard from again. Ganondorf is sealed in the Twilight Realm during his botched execution. He works with Zant to overthrow Princess Midna and launch an attack on Hyrule. The hero of Twilight works with Midna to defeat the two usurpers and restore order to both worlds. Hundreds of years later, Ganondorf is once again reborn. He creates a dark double of Link, which the hero of Light draws the Four Sword to defeat, unwittingly releasing Vati. Link uses the sword to destroy Vati and Shadow Link and seals Ganon within the Four Sword. The Guardian of Time, Sia, falls in love with the various incarnations of the hero. Her feelings for him are used by Ganondorf to corrupt and control her. Her good half is split off into a new entity named Lana. Sia sends an army of monsters to attack Hyrule and lure out the bearers of the Triforce. Sia steals the three pieces and opens rifts in time to obtain Ganondorf's sealed spirit fragments. The Cocoa farmer Linkle, believing she is the reincarnation of the hero, sets off to assist the forces of Hyrule. After gathering allies from across time, the hero of warriors obtains the Master Sword and defeats Sia. The soul fragment sealed by the Master Sword is released, restoring the Demon King to full power. He raises an army and conquers Hyrule, taking the three Triforce pieces from their keepers. Lana summons the heroes from across time again, and the united Hyrulean forces put an end to Ganon's reign of terror. Link and Zelda return the Master Sword to its pedestal to keep Ganon sealed. At the same time, Linkle arrives at Hyrule Castle and assists in defeating the Dark King Dodongo. Ganon later returns as a phantom. He takes a Triforce of power from Lana and steals Sia's magic to open a rift to another timeline. Link and Lana work with that world's King Daphnes and Princess Zelda to restore Sia's magic and defeat Ganon for good. Sia and Lana resume their position as the Guardians of Time. I am personally hoping any future releases will redo the story from scratch and get rid of some of the dumb bullshit rather than expand on what's already here. Like, why is it necessary for Linkle to be so bad at directions that she goes the wrong way every single time? Like, is that an endearing character quirk? She's dumb, she's an idiot, get the fuck out of it. And take Lana while you're at it. Why do we even need those? Like, we have Impa and Sia, like, the best girls. Why do you need anyone else?